William Goldenberg, editor of Air. This is your fourth Ben Affleck film. How has your relationship evolved over the years, and what kind of shorthand do you guys have now?
Well, of course, working with Ben is in every situation has been sort of one of the highlights of the highlight of my career. You know, we have a great partnership. The first thing we did together was Gone Baby Gone, and 17 years ago, I think. And that was his first film as a director. We didn't know each other, and I came in the middle of it. He wasn't happy with the cut, and I replaced an editor, and basically recut the movie from scratch, you know, without even looking at the other cut. And he sat with me on that every day, all day, next to me at the Avid, going through things, you know, frame by frame, looking at all the dailies, and you know, just it was the two of us at the Avid all the time. And move on to Air 4 pictures later, it became, and now he's much busier as he's an executive. He has this company, Artist Equity, which is fantastic, and so he's got a lot more on his plate, and we have a much more of a shorthand. So on Air, it was a lot more just like coming into my room, giving me a few impressions, and then going and leaving. And you know, and the fortunate thing about Air was that we shot the movie in the same building that I was editing, that the production office was. We took over this office building in Santa Monica, and everything was under one roof. So while we were shooting, he was constantly coming in and out of my room between setups, you know, at lunch, at the beginning of the day, the end of the day. So we were constantly evolving the cut while we were shooting. So by the time we finished, I think we were already, as opposed to being just an assembly where he's only just viewed some scenes, he had really worked the scenes with me, but doesn't spend much time with me in the editing room anymore. You know, brief visits, I do the notes, we talk about things, and then we have screenings. So, you know, the trust that we have in the shorthand we've developed, and our similar tastes and similar styles have, you know, made the relationship, you know, better. And also we don't need to be like, you know, together at the Avid 24/7.
Right. You know each other's sensibilities.
Yeah. I mean, I think we think very, very similarly, and have very similar tastes. So we're often on the same page about stuff. So, you know, to the point where he's halfway through a sentence and I know exactly what he means, or the same goes the other way. You know, and it makes it so much more fun, and it's so much better for the picture, you know, to have that, you know, to not have to have that sort of, when you get with a new director, there's an unfamiliarity, and you have to develop a relationship and develop a trust. And now we have that going in right from day one. In fact, I think the third day of shooting, I came into my editing room at 7 a.m. and he was sitting at the Avid, you know, playing around with stuff, because he knows how to work the Avid, for better or worse. And
did he cut together any scene, anything that ended up?
You know what he did, especially in the beginning of the film, the montage, you know, the opening credit montage. There was a ton, hours and hours of that footage. And then, you know, the stock footage clips I used, I could use anything ever done in 1984. So the possibilities were endless. So he would throw a bunch of stuff, not the stock footage. He would take all the stuff that was shot at our Nike headquarters. There was 16 millimeter of video, and he would build out a select roll to a piece of music and send it over and go, okay, here's my selects for this. And then I would take it and make an edit out of it. And okay, one or two times he would cut a scene and show it to me, and then I would show him my version, and he would get all bummed out because you go, you're better at this than me. And I was like, I hope so. You know, otherwise.
So did you or he put in the Dunkin' Donuts guy?
That was me.
You did it for him.
That was me. It was actually my assistant's idea, because we had a different clip in there. There were some things we couldn't get cleared legally at the end of the day, and I can't remember what we had in there instead of that. And my assistant said, "Oh my God, we got to have a Dunkin' Donuts." And we searched high and low for a piece that would be fun, and found that, and I was very excited. It was definitely done on purpose. You know,
it's a nice little, I don't even know if it's an Easter egg, but it's it's very meta, I guess.
Yeah. Now he's got, Artist Equity is doing Dunkin' Donuts,
Love all those ads. So
What's that?
all his Dunkin' ads.
Yeah, and they're like my assistant or my ex-assistant, one of the editor who's doing, I'm in the middle of directing a film right now, and the editor who is cutting my film cut those commercials, and they like broke the internet. So as they say, so I'm glad we put it into air. So
Yeah,
this
sure.
sort of was.
Well, one thing I love about this film is just how you need to convey so much with body language, especially in the boardroom scene, because we don't see Jordan's face. So we just see his, how he, like, his restlessness, like during the pitch, and how he feels about it. And then also there's so many phone call scenes in this film too. And I love that, the person on the line can do things that the other person can't see because they're not in the same room together. So can you talk about like editing those types of scenes and just including, like visual, nonverbal body language so the viewer can see like how this person's really feeling about this?
Yeah, phone calls are fantastic for that reason. I mean, on the surface, you think, oh, phone call, how boring, but it's actually can be way more fun. You can have way more fun with those scenes because of what you're just talking about, because the other person can't see you. So you could say the nicest thing while giving them the finger, like, or making a face or rolling your eyes or whatever. So it opens up all kinds of possibilities. And, with Matt and Viola and Chris Messina, that they understand that, they're such gifted actors. They understand that they can be much broader because they can't, the other person can't see them, whether it's Matt, pumping his fist and trying to stay calm in his voice, because he's so excited that the Jordan Michael may sign with them, or, Viola takes the phone away from her ear at one point during the conversation with Matt. And,
She doesn't want to listen to him.
yeah, she don't want to hear it. She don't want to hear it. So, and that was all spontaneous from the actors. And so it opens up a world of possibilities. And the great thing about what they did in Air is they shot all the phone calls simultaneously. So they were in the same building, but just different parts of the building, and shot, usually 2 or 3 cameras on each actor. So I had lots of different angles and lots of different choices, and the camera's always moving. So that really gave it a lot of, energy. And so when you have things shot simultaneously like that, you get all these different things that really happen organically between 2 people, that when you shoot, oftentimes phone calls are shot, where the script supervisor is reading the lines, the off-camera lines, and you just don't get that spontaneity, and you don't get that extra magic or improvisation that you get when they're done simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you caught the thing in the boardroom, because that was, very difficult, because I might have to show, like you say, the restlessness of Michael Jordan, without seeing his face, and, looking for those moments. And I'm not sure whether the guy who was playing Michael was just restless himself, or he was acting. I don't really know. I never spoke to him, but, luckily for me, during, like, you can see in the wide shot when they're showing the little highlight reel to him, and he starts moving around in his chair, and he puts his hand on his chin on his hand, and, all those little moments, I was able to convey what he's thinking without seeing his face. And, and then the way that Ben and Bob Richardson shot the parents was past Michael in the foreground on both sides. So you could you'd see Michael looking to his dad, or looking to his mom, or his mom looking at him. And all those moments helped me tell the story of what he was thinking without seeing his face. And I'm glad that you noticed it, because, I never know what, when people, yeah,
I feel like there's, especially when the shots of like him looking at his parents, and like they know their son, right? It's like he's not into this at all. So
yeah, no, it's again, a credit to Viola, and it's actually, I didn't even know that was her husband playing her husband,
Julius.
Julius. I didn't know that they were married until well after the shooting was done. I was just like,
you just had insane chemistry that whole time. So.
Oh my God, you should see some of the dailies where they're like, oh yeah, when you go back and look at it afterwards, you go, oh yeah, they're married.
Well, Billy, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and
My
we'll see you
pleasure.
back in a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Hilda Rasula, editor of American Fiction. This film is based on Percival Everett's novel Erasure. Were you familiar with the book before this?
No, I wasn't. I had heard of Percival Everett. He had like a New Yorker profile a few years ago that I'd seen his name and I knew he was local, but that's really all I knew about him, and hadn't read the book. No.
Did you read it after Cord brought this to you?
No, I actually read it after we locked Picture.
Okay.
Yeah, a few years ago, I decided that when I work on an adaptation, I do not want to read the book beforehand. And I really just want to follow what the screenplay is trying to tell me and not get too influenced by the original book.
That was my next question. I was like, as an editor, what do you want to work off, just the script or the source material?
Yeah, I think both ways are fine. And if a director ever asked me to do, read the source material first and they wanted me to, of course I would. But in this case, yeah.
What did you and Cord Jefferson talk about once you came on board? Because I love what I love about this film is like it's a satire, but it's not like a total farce. Like there's a lot of really grounded drama in it as well.
Yes. Yeah, we talked about that tone. We didn't really talk about external influences. It was really about the script and the character arcs and the story. And Cord always knew that he wanted to do something that could go into some absurdist places, but that had a certain groundedness that, you felt like this could happen in the real world. Whatever elements of satire are happening could happen. And we occasionally would have these moments in the edit room of like questioning certain jokes, as you do with any comedy when you're kind of comedy, of like, is this a step too far? Is this pendulum swinging a little too into the zone of like, would this really happen? And then we'd have moments where we'd look at each other and be like, nope, we've been in rooms. This has happened like this before. Each of us can relate to this experience.
Yeah, because the film, it's a lot of the mockery or stand up is of the publishing and the film industry as well, and some of the conversations.
Media at large has a target on its back.
So were there any specific moments or scenes where you did have to pull back a little, like, oh, maybe we're leaning too far into the set a little bit?
Sure. I mean, it wasn't so much a question of Cord's writing, because his writing is so good, but it was more about, like any movie, honing the performances, really making sure that we kept this grounded, an edge of a grounded tone. With my taste anyway, tends to not swing too broad in terms of comedy. I really like more grounded comedy or dark comedy. And so we together just sort of naturally fell into a zone of kind of appreciating the same vibe and wanting to keep things in a slightly grounded, realistic zone and not get too farcical.
Mm-hmm. Well, when Monk is writing his book, he imagines certain scenes and then we see it play out in the film in front of him. So what was it like putting together that scene in particular?
That scene is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I'm glad you called that out. That kind of edge of magic realism or that happens is a special moment in the movie, obviously, because it breaks all of your expectations of what you thought this movie was leading up to that moment, and it's this like strange breath of fresh air that comes in tonally, which is great. I also love that it's like such an imaginative way to stage that. Like in so many other movies, I feel like we would cut away to the imagined book that he's writing in his head, or find a different way to reveal that. I mean, watching writers write on screen can often be a little painful as well. So yeah, I mean, to me, I read that it was all there on the page, and it was just such a startling moment in the script that when I read it, I was like, this is amazing. This is going to be amazing. And it was, when the footage came in too, it was one of those magical scenes that kind of was electric from the beginning. I love that scene.
Yeah, and I love the way it's shot too, because it's it's a satirizing the what he's writing about, basically the way it's framed and everything too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we knew that in that scene and the series of scenes at the end, we really wanted to play get deep into this play in a meta sort of way with story, with the concept of story and storytelling, because that's really ultimately such a huge part of what the movie is about and what our protagonist is about.
Yeah. Oh, so what was it like editing those final sequences towards the end? Because it's different genres, I guess you could say. I don't know, not to give much away.
No, I'll try not to spoil anything, but I will say it's like an editor's dream, to you go through your career not wanting to get too pigeonholed into one genre or another. And so to be handed an opportunity inside of one movie to play with genre and to dip into these different tones of action movie and sweeping romance and satire, all in a breath, in a sense, is it was so much fun. It really was just a dream to kind of play with that and have fun with that.
Yeah. Was there any thing that was cut, like any genre that was cut, or was that everything else in the script made it?
No, there was not like an extra ending that was cut. In fact, what's funny is that there was an extra ending that was added.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is interesting. We Cord wrote a new, there are two rewrite new scenes that were added, later in the process and reshot, and the final ending is a new scene that he wrote. We realized that we had a really wonderful ending that left like 80% of audiences, we would cut to black for the end credits, and it would leave like 80% of people would leave laughing and gasping. It was a very funny, interesting ending, but we realized that ultimately for the film that we had, that's really trying to explore this larger scope of human experience and human emotion, ending right in the pocket of satire was probably not what the movie really needed. And so Cord wrote this this different extra ending that I think actually weirdly it just lifted the whole thing up into this interesting human zone,
Yeah, I think it definitely works. And again, it goes back to what you were saying before about balancing the groundedness with the satire.
I think we had to ultimately question, like, what are we really doing here in this movie? The movie's doing different things and juggling different balls and kind of playing a lot of different experiences and emotions, but ultimately, is this just a satire, or is this like a humanist film that is ultimately about people living their lives? And obviously we sort of landed on the latter.
Yeah. Well, speaking of people, you have an amazing cast here, but Jeffrey Wright, obviously the central performance, and he's so great in this. And I feel like, people, like maybe some fans might not know like how funny he can be. Like, I think they'll be maybe surprised by his performance here. But it's like, what was it like just editing, just an incredible performance like that when you have, so much material from him basically. And I know he also improv certain lines that ended up in the final cut.
Yes, that's true too. In a word, it's a gift. His daily started coming in and I was like, oh, wow, he is in the pocket of who this character is. He really knew who Monk was, our protagonist. He knew who Monk was right away and was always in him kind of perfectly, he's really such a strong actor. I think the character, of course, is also like a very tightly wound kind of grumpy guy. So anytime there was a little like hint of a smile peeking through or a chuckle that would escape Monk's lips, I was like, we're using that. We are using every piece of that. But yeah, he's amazing. It is a gift when you have the perfect actor playing a role. I mean, how can you? It's great. And yes, the comedy you mentioned, his humor is actually, we think of him as such a dramatic actor, but like in a lot of the comedic scenes, I would use his single, a cut to his single as a joke punctuation. His single became the joke, even though he's a straight man, he's the ultimate straight man in those scenes. It's like his little very subtle reactions to things become the joke, and they punctuate it like this little shot note, on a trumpet or something. It's and yeah, it's funny because there's so much absurdity going on around him that you need the straightness of Monk and Jeffrey's face to kind of anchor that. And that actually became a humorous touchstone, we realized.
Yeah, and it's also like his reluctance to participate in this, right? He's just he can't believe this is all happening.
Exactly. Like sometimes just like one amazing hangdog look from Jeffrey is like it just
I feel you. I get it. It's totally.
Yeah, it is sort of actually, this is a good point you're making too. It's sort of inviting the audience in to be like, can you relate to this? Do you see what's happening here? Yeah.
I get it. Yeah, I feel you. So Hilda, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Victoria Boydell, editor of Saltburn. This is such a wild, twisted tale. What were your first thoughts after you read the script by Boydell?
Oh my God. I mean, I read this, I heard that Emerald had written her second film. I was desperate. I was absolutely desperate to get a hold of that script. And I mean, obviously it didn't disappoint. It's such a great ride. I mean, it's tonally, it weaves such an interesting path tonally. The film kind of starts out as one kind of film, you know, Oliver starts as one kind of character. You're led through his kind of innocent narration, talking about Felix, and then through Oxford, through Saltburn, these grotesquely funny characters. And then, well, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a few twists and turns on the way. Yeah, I mean, I've never wanted to cut a film so much in my whole career, and I'm really old. I've been working a long time. I was really keen.
That's high praise.
And I didn't think I stood a chance. Honestly, I thought she could have her pick of anyone in this country, and I've no idea. I've no idea.
She chose you.
We clicked when we met on Zoom, but I've no idea how, why. I'm still kind of pinching myself. I feel really lucky.
She knew what she was doing, because I love. Well, I guess let's first start with the montage, the opening montage of the film, because there's a mystery aspect to this movie, and it opens with these images that we're going to see later in the film, and like you said, a voiceover from Oliver talking about his love for Felix, and it's such a beguiling little tease. So can you talk about assembling that and what to show and what not to show?
So it was always in the script that we would show sort of snippets, and some of them were written, the particular beats. They were written in several ways. I mean, they were shot in they were written to be there and later, and shot in 2 or 3 different ways to reappear in the middle of the film and then later. So they appear at the very beginning in that narration, then where they happen, and then later in the Elspeth's bed. But actually our first version, I mean, probably our first version visually was maybe a little bit too much leaning onto sort of trailer, and slightly randomized and less poetic heart, and maybe less memory, and more wham bam. But actually the key tiny thing we changed, which was 25 frames or something, is that the original assembly of that opening section before you cut to Oxford and Zadok the priest, like the kicker in Zadok, he answers his own question. So he says, "Did I love him?" And then he answered it. And the second assistant editor, interestingly, she came on board a few weeks after the shoot, and I sat her in a room and said, "Watch the film." And she came out and she said, you gave too much away by answering the question. So I thought it would be quite fun that he takes an inhale of breath and goes and doesn't answer. And that seemed to create the mystery.
Yeah, well, because it's also like his obsession with Felix, it's also about like the thin line between love and hate. And then you kind of see it change like throughout the film. And then there are certain points later on where like is this the hate manifesting? And there's like certain sequences at the end too. So was this something you and Emerald also talked about?
Yes, so we spent months going backwards and forwards with, I mean, with lots of sections, but particularly with that area, because what's fun is, I mean, it's such a fine line of calibration. We wanted to show the lie visually, is kind of where we landed, so that you hear him later say, I hated him, while you see him sink to his knees sobbing by a grave. And we felt, yeah, I mean, we tried quite a few things, but what kind of really punched us in the solar plexus was the sense that the more he sort of railed against something verbally, the more you could witness the absolute opposite, and the more hopefully people understand what both Emerald and I feel very strongly personally, is it's possible to almost love someone to the point of annihilation, where it does become obsessive, but it also, there's something skin crawlingly, viscerally hateful as well. But maybe I'm revealing too much about myself.
Well, that's also another aspect of the film, that you it creates some like discomfort and like some like cringe moments, and some that is also through the edit, because we linger on scenes perhaps a little bit longer than some people might want or expect.
Yeah.
There's several scenes like towards the end, like the grave scene in particular too, but I think it's also very effective, because by the end, when it's over, it's like it's very tragic and almost kind of sad. And I mean, it is sad, but it's like, you know, you feel pity too a little bit. So
yeah,
what did you guys
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there was, obviously it won't surprise you to know there was a lot of pressure on us with shortening the grave scene, probably originally trying it without, but I don't think we listened to that one. But we did genuinely in earnest look at trimming it in various different ways, and screened it various different lengths. But hand on heart, if you, without spoiling anything, if you come out too soon, it says something much more brutal and vulgar and less emotional. And there's something about watching a man unable to complete and sobbing and breaking down, and the impotence and desperation that we found it quite sad and romantic. I know it's not for everyone, but maybe that goes back to the first comment about I have no idea why everyone chose me, but maybe because we're both twisted. And I mean, there was no question in our room. There was never, ever a disagreement or a debate. We were absolutely unified in our taste and sense of loss, romance, sex, things that other people find disgusting, we found sexy. But, you know.
Yeah, I'm glad you got for it.
That's why Emerald is unique, I guess.
Yeah. Well, this film is also a great to watch a second time, third time, multiple times, because when on rewatch, scenes take on a whole new meaning. So how does that affect your approach as an editor? When do you feel like you can't give too much away, or are there enough clues here that people can catch it when they watch it again?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously, like many films, we tested it both with friends and family and with kind of formal 400 strangers in LA kind of screening. And honestly, there are some people who, actually someone came up to me a couple of days ago and said, you explained too much at the end. And other people have come up to me going, oh my God, my jaw fell on the floor at that reveal. And you can't please everyone. We worked quite hard. We had versions in that explained too much. We pulled back, pulled out a lot of the voice at the end and a lot of the images. And then some people felt they were left a little wanting. And I guess Emerald and I cut the version we wanted, and hope that you know, some people, I mean, we've deliberately left some things in that hopefully people will spot second or third time round. I'm not going to ask you about one in case it spoils, but there's a couple of things in there that I have no idea. I occasionally ask people, did you spot it? And people say, oh, I'm going to go and watch the film again. But we've left a few gems in for second and third viewings. But some of it, I think, is down to an individual audience. But that's okay. I mean, we're all, at the end of the day, we're all individual viewers with our own baggage and our own history and our own sensibilities. So.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, can't please everyone. So yeah. Well, Victoria, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you. Michael Andrews, editor of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. You came aboard the sequel, but were you a fan of the first film?
I was. When I saw the first one, I was really blown away. I watched it and thought the whole time I was just thinking, how did this get made? I mean, this is incredible. Like on every level, like how did they pull this off? And I was kind of jealous a little bit. I knew the people, I knew the producer and the directors, and I was like, gee, I wish they would have asked me to do that. And I was very happy when I got the call from the producer who I'd worked with before to come on board for the second one. Mm-hmm. But I thought Miles was such a fantastic character, and I really fell in love with him in the first movie. I think he's one of the greatest characters in recent cinema. So I really wanted to kind of see it through.
Yeah. Well, these films are such a massive undertaking, take years. So how long did you work on this?
The normal run is about 3 years on an animated movie. I was on it for 2. There was another editor on before who left after a year. So I came in, and there was, a version of the movie that sort of existed in a very rough state. And we just kind of picked it up and ran from there.
Uh-huh. So where do you start at that point when you come in? Is just like storyboarding and like the art?
This is something that a lot of people don't understand what, people who edit animated movies do, but we're on from the very beginning. We're on from, phase 1 with story, and we're basically helping in pre-production to help, define what the story will be before it goes into production, because once it goes into production, that's where costs a lot of money.
Animate it, yeah.
So they want to work out all the kinks in advance before they get to that phase. So we, spend, up to a year and a half, 2 years working on the story, but then it doesn't even stop, because once it goes into production, you're still working on story. And it becomes kind of juggling plates of of your 30 or so sequences, some are in production, some aren't. Even the ones that are in production, sometimes you have to kind of go back in because you've changed something early on. So even though that's been animated, sorry, we got to go back in and revise that, add some new lines here and reanimate it. So everything's kind of still up for grabs, but hopefully you kind of nail it down as much as you can in the first year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah. So after you storyboard, you send it to animation, and
there's a phase in between that where it's called layout, which is a chance for the pipeline to get set up, where they can set up all the shots. And it's sort of a camera department. Layout's not really an accurate term. It's like they go in and define what the shot is really going to look like. And they just use very crude CG forms of all the characters with minimal movement or whatever. And it's an interesting phase, because I work back and forth with them quite a bit until we hone it down, because that's phase 2 of let's really lock this thing down before it really does go into animation. So
so when you do send it to layout, I guess what do you have to put in your storyboards to send it to layout to sell what you want the scene to look like, because you don't have the benefit of live action performances?
Right. And sometimes it varies because of the differences in boarding styles from the artists. Mm-hmm. Some of them are great draftsmen, and one of our directors, Joaquin Dos Santos, is an incredible board artist, one of the best I've ever worked with. Some of his scenes, we spent a lot of time just pointing layout in that direction, copy what he did. But in animation, every step of the way, with all these people working on it, you hope that every department takes it and runs with it and makes it better, and you always want everyone to plus it. So once you have a cut with storyboards, sometimes I'll finish a cut and we've kludged everything imaginable together just to make something work. We're cutting and pasting pictures, and sometimes you don't have time to go back to board artists and have them redraw it. So we're doing whatever we can to, to sell the idea of the scene. Sometimes when I'm at the end of that and it's going into production, I start to have a little panic, like, oh, I hope they understand all this. So we try to make it as clear as we can. Sometimes we'll even put notes on it, like what it's meant to be if it's not clear in there. And then when we sit down and we launch them and talk through them with them, and it's a chance for the directors to sort of give the license to the camera department to take it and run with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. One thing I love about these films is also like the extra beats from just like reaction shots of the characters. Like sometimes it's comedy, sometimes it's emotional beats, especially in this one. So how do you do you have to request those? It's like, make sure we have someone, reacting to this, because again, you don't have humans.
It's funny you say that, because there's often, the tendency of the board artist is to board what someone is saying on screen at that time. Yeah. And that's not always what you want. So when I get a reaction shot, I love it. I love reaction shots. Sometimes those are my favorites in the movie. There's one where Miles just sort of looks at Jeff while Spot is doing his thing, and it's one of my favorite shots in the movie. It's crucial, because that's where you get laughs and you get to like tap into what the characters are thinking. So yeah, sometimes we do have to like remember that we need those along the way.
Yeah, we need this character to do an eye roll or
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
I worked on Shrek, and one of my favorite shots in Shrek is just Shrek doing an eye roll while when he first meets Fiona.
And you requested that one too?
I don't know if I did. I don't know. That one might have come naturally, but it was great.
So long ago, who knows? Like towards the end of the film, there's a twist reveal that Miles is not where he thinks he is, or where the audience is led to believe he is up until that point. So what was it like editing that sequence where it's like beat by beats, you're getting to the reveal, and then you're cross-cutting with images from the place he thinks he is?
Right. That was probably the most delicate scene in the whole movie, because we didn't want to give too much away, and we wanted everyone to sort of realize what was going on right around the same time. And we worked on it to the bitter end, literally, and we were constantly debating, like, how many times do we cut to Gwen, because she's hanging outside the window, and if we cut to her too much, you start to think like, well, why is she just sitting there? What is she watching? And it connects her too much to the scene, and she's really not watching anything because they're not in that room. And we had screenings, in the animation world, we do screenings about every 2 to 3 months, and we just put the whole movie up and show executives, get notes, go back in, rip it apart, start over, do whatever we need to do. And we had screenings where people were confused by it, like they didn't understand, like they thought they didn't get that she was in a different place than Miles, and we didn't know how much clearer we could make it, but we ended up having a shot where we follow Gwen into the room, and Miles and his mother are not in the room, and then you cut to the other side, and Miles and his mother are in the room. And then when Gwen jumps down into the room, we actually did a match cut across the 2 rooms just to make it crystal clear. And I think that's when people start to realize what's going on. And it plays out really well, because then he glitches, and then his uncle, who he thought was dead, walks through the door. And I love the scene in particular. And in the glitch moment, we actually had to add some kind of narration flashback material to sort of clarify just quick little glimpses of things that Miguel said to him, and things where he's putting it all together, like the same with the audiences at the same time. But it was just a little bit, of an assist to the audience.
Yeah. Well, like from an editing standpoint, is that something you I don't know if like is the right word, but it's like, when you don't want to show too much or tell too much, but then it's like the audience is not getting in a test screening, so you have to include a little bit more. Yeah.
And I lean more towards like, I don't want to be on the nose. I want to like pull it back and let the audience figure it out and make them feel, I think that's very rewarding for an audience to to go, oh yeah, I get it now. Like to sit in an audience at that moment and watch people like whisper to each other, oh, he's in the wrong universe, is fantastic. Then you've succeeded. So I enjoyed cutting that scene very much, and it was very challenging. But when we would lean too far to Miles explaining everything out to the audience, that's where I wanted to pull back, and I fought for that, because we had that at one point where he was sort of narrating like, oh, I'm in the wrong universe, and it just seemed a little too spelled out.
Yeah, it's too much. You don't need to say it.
Yeah.
You could just see it. Yeah,
but he can hear like things he's already heard, and it plays a little differently.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you. Michael Harte, editor of Still, a Michael J. Fox movie. I understand you sort of manifested working on this film because you were watching Michael J. Fox films while you were editing Third Uncle Strangers, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what happened. I looked at it in a film that's about kind of being true to yourself and honest. I should come clean and say, when I was young, I was obsessed with Michael J. Fox movies and Michael J. Fox. I wasn't very good at sports in school, and I'd watched a lot of movies, and more often than not, I was kind of drawn to Michael's movies and his characters, and especially Back to the Future. He was an Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I definitely wasn't. So he was my guy growing up, and I got obsessed, like literally obsessed with his movies, and still am with Back to the Future. And it's one of the reasons I became an editor, because of him and his movies. So cut to like when I think it was 3-4 years ago, cutting Three Identical Strangers, and we talked a bit about Michael J. Fox movies because we wanted the opening of that documentary to feel like an 80s movie, and approached the agent and his agent and said, look, would there be any possibility we could make a documentary about him? And he said, you're too late. Davis Guggenheim is making it, but he needs an editor. So we got lucky, and he needed an editor, but he just didn't know that he had a super fan on his hands who kind of knew a lot of the material. So it was nice.
It was meant to be. So
I think so.
Yeah. Well, the doc is so unique, like the style, because it's a mix of narration from his audiobooks, and then obviously archival footage from his work and interview with him, and also recreations.
Yes.
So what was that, like, Davis's plan from the beginning, or that's just somehow evolved throughout the process?
Yeah, it was a bit of both. Actually, Davis's biggest direction at the top of the project, I mean, there was nothing, there was no material, we hadn't shot anything when I joined. He brought me on board, and the only kind of idea he had was, this needs to feel like a wild ride. It needs to feel like kind of like a Michael J. Fox movie from the 80s, and we should, let's not always lean into the standard documentary techniques. We can be creative with this because he's such a unique character, and so let's make something unique that is reflective of his character. And I began with his audiobook, Lucky Man. So that's where I started. I knew it, obviously. I knew it because it was Michael J. Fox. But I listened to it and broke that down into, he wrote a really good book called Lucky Man about 2001. But luckily for us, he'd recorded it in an audiobook, and his voice sounds great. So I used that as a starting point and structure, and created a structure to his story, of his Hollywood story initially. And we just listened to it and went to LA, and we listened to it together, me and Davis started imagining scenes with Michael as in recreations. But I had a big issue with it because I'm like, this is not Michael J. Fox. I couldn't accept that an actor would play Michael J. Fox. I just couldn't get in my head. And I've worked on documentaries before where you use recreations, and sometimes they can really work, sometimes they can't. And what you have to do in docs, especially when it's about somebody famous, is you will show the back of their head a lot. You'll see this a lot in documentaries, and I've started to kind of move away from that a bit, because I think if you use it too much, it's distancing, and you're just looking at the back of someone's head. And I think eventually it feels like you're in a movie with somebody, really in a movie theater with somebody who's really tall, just sitting in front of you, and you can't see the screen. And also, you are just crying out to see their face, to connect to them, to see their eyes, so it can feel distancing. And I didn't know initially. I was like, I don't think this is going to work. But one day I was in, we were storyboarding these things. We had a guy in Barcelona who's storyboarding these scenes, and then one day I was kind of editing on my own in the edit in London, and I had a scene from Bright Lights Big City where Michael is flicking through just a couple of sheets of paper, and the audiobook scene that we were looking at the time, he was talking about getting a script for Back to the Future. So I thought, well, I mean, what would happen if we took the shot from this movie and put it on top of the audiobook? And I thought it was cool because I'm a Michael J. Fox fan and a Back to the Future fan, and it worked for me. But then I took a piece of music, Alan Silvestri's famous score from Back to the Future, and it's that little tinkle that goes like diddle, and he's hinting at Back to the Future without giving it away. And when we put those three things together, I mean, I got like very excited about it, but again, I'm a super fan, so I didn't want to get too excited. So I sent the clip to Davis. He was in LA at the time, and I was cutting in London initially when we were trying to find the grammar of the movie. And then I get a call from him the next day, and he said, "You need to call me." And I thought I'm either getting fired or because it was a kind of off the wall idea that I'd seen once or twice, but not this. And he said, "This is one of the tricks of the movie. This is a grammar that we can use to tell the story, and we can go for it." And then I think one of the producers said, "But there's so much Michael J. Fox movies, and how are we going to watch all this stuff?" And I said, "I hold my beer.
I know them all." So.
So they paid me to watch them all over again, which was great.
Yeah, I think it's a very bold choice, and maybe you're kind of taken aback in the beginning, but it works ultimately once you watch. But that Back to the Future, that whole sequence when he's filming that and Family Ties at the same time, you have this incredible montage of him just going back and forth between the sets. What was it like editing that?
It's like, I mean, it was my dream to edit something like that. I think I remembered reading it when I read the book first, and it always stuck with me, that scene, and I imagined in my head what he would do. But I think when we figured out that we can play with his movies in an interesting way, that scene became unlimited. What we could do with it, there were so many ways we could shoot it. There's so many ways we could edit it. You've also got the score from Back to the Future underneath it. To think that I could cut anything with the score from Back to the Future, so that raised the bar. It was like, we have to match that. If we're going to use that track, the theme music from Back to the Future, we better earn it. So I loved editing it, but it was one of those scenes, and I don't know if any of the other editors are the same, but it was a scene I kept going back to. So I would cut a scene, and then I would take a break, and maybe about 5 o'clock in the evening, I would start just chipping away at the scene. And I basically cut it for like 6 months on and off, by always perfecting it, always getting it right. And my worry in the back of my mind was always, will we get the rights to use the music? Will we get the rights to use these clips from Family Ties and Back to the Future? And that was always bubbling in the back of my mind. But I thought, just commit to it anyway. And if it's as good as it can be, then we'll have earned using the music and earned the rights to use all these clips. So thankfully we did.
Yeah, for sure.
People seem to like it.
Well, one of my favorite moments is in the beginning of the film, one of the verite scenes, like the present day footage of Michael, and he is walking on the street, and he greets a fan and walks past her, and then he trips, and he says, "You knocked me off my feet." And it's just like, it really sets the tone for the rest of the doc. It's so, it's like his comedic timing, obviously genius, and so playful and honest, and he has this debilitating disease, but there's no self-pity. So what was it like getting that footage where you immediately like, we got to include this in the film?
Actually, I wasn't, because when I saw it first, I was listening to a different microphone. I was listening to the boom mic that was shooting at the bottom of the street. So I didn't hear him say the line, "You've knocked me off my feet." So I watched it, and I was like, this is really uncomfortable. I don't think we could use it, but it's definitely not for the start of the movie. And I spoke to Davis, and I knew he was excited about it. And he said, have you watched that clip? And I said, yeah, it's good. Maybe we'll act 3 or something. He was like, really? Are you sure? What did you? And then he told me, he said, have you listened to it? I switched mics, put it back, listened to it again, and it was like, okay, this is everything. This, exactly like you said, this is going to set the tone for the rest of the movie. Because I've worked on, for a while, I worked on a lot of documentaries about with stories that people weren't very familiar with. like Three Identical Strangers, and even Don't Fuck with Cats, where it was like stranger than fiction stories, and you surprise the audience with the plot and with the story, and they almost think, I can't believe I don't know this story. The issue I had with this, even though I always wanted to work on it, was everybody knows Michael J. Fox's story. So how do you do that in a unique way, and without just feeling like a Wikipedia page? And what I realized when I heard that line, and even before that, the more I thought about it, is the secret weapon you have when you do a story about a celebrity like Michael J. Fox or any celebrity. You have a secret weapon, which is the audience's expectation of what they think they're going to get, because they already know the story in their head, and you can subvert that. So when I heard that line, I was like, we can immediately subvert the audience's expectations. There's also a key line before that when he's speaking to Davis, and Davis says to him, this is a sad sack story about a guy who gets Parkinson's and it crushes him. And Michael says the line, nah, that's boring. As soon as he said that, and as soon as he said the line, it allowed us to go in a different direction. This is not a film that you're expecting. It's not about it's about Parkinson's. It is there, but it is Michael being upbeat about this, and ultimately it just allowed us to make a film that was very, very funny, because he's very funny and he uses his humor as a weapon, and did throughout the documentary. And it's funny because when I talked to Davis about it, initially I thought everything needs to be told in archive, and Davis wanted to use a lot of recreations, but actually it was when Michael J. Fox showed up and did his interview. He owned the movie, he set the tone for it, and it became, a Michael J. Fox movie ultimately.
Yeah, you cannot have him in there, and then he gave everyone permission to laugh. Like that was really key.
Exactly. And I remember going to Sundance to premiere it, and I was terrified, because I was like, I don't know if it's going to work. And I said to Davis, I remember thinking beforehand, that scene when he falls over and gets up, if we don't get a laugh, this film is done. It's not going to work, because that is the tone of the next 80% of the movie. And we were sat there, and Michael J. Fox was sat behind me. The pressure of watching that with him at Sundance and thinking, is this going to work? And I remember he said the line, it was like just this wave of laughter that started in the theater, and you could tell, and it wasn't just laughter, it was relief. It was like comic relief, and he gave the audience permission to laugh and permission to look at him in a completely different way, in a way that you weren't expecting him to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Michael, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. Welcome to our Meet the Experts film editing panel. Today, we're joined by William Goldenberg from Air, Hilda Rasula from American Fiction, Victoria Boydell from Saltburn, Michael Andrews from Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and Michael Harte from Still, a Michael J. Fox movie. Thank you all for being here. We know editors have to do lots and lots of cuts and lots of adjustments. It's a lot of trial and error. So I'm not sure how you can explain this exactly, but how do you know when it's the right cut? Is it just kind of instinctual? Is it just like talking with the director over and over again and you both agree like this is it? Billy, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's a combination of all those things. And then, I feel it's right by instinct, and then show, you do a first cut and show it to the director, and he may have a different idea of what feels right, or he or she may have a different idea of what feels right, but then we'll come to a consensus of what feels right. And then ultimately you show it to an audience and see what they think, early screenings with friends and family, or who don't know anything about the subject, aren't in the movie business, and see how they, when there's an audience in the room, you get a real sense of what's right and what's not right, what's working and what's not working. So I think that it's sort of a step-by-step process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Victoria, you got a lot of polarizing reactions to Saltburn.
That's true. For me, it's kind of about the journey. I'm sure, as everyone knows, certainly here, there's a million ways to cut a film. There's a million ways to cut each scene in a film. And I feel that when you're at the end of the journey, and it could be because everyone tells you you're at the end of the journey because they're all happy and the money's run out. But for me, it's an emotional journey, and Emerald and I tried so much. There was no stone left unturned in cutting Saltburn, and while I was in it, I was so in it, I didn't know we were near the end. Usually with a film, I can tell there's a crucial screening where all the execs, the financiers, everyone looks at you and they're like, yeah, basically we're happy with the film, and just you'll be done in 10 days time or something. With Saltburn, we were so in it and so immersed in it. I wasn't quite sure when we would feel that we'd arrived at the cut, and then suddenly a few weeks later we looked at each other and we're like, I think we're ready to put this to bed now. And
sometimes you also just have to let it go, right? So
I think that's what we felt. I think we felt like we've been locked in this room, and we're probably going to start going around the houses again and trying things that we tried 5 months ago. And actually, a lot of things we were trying, we were going, no, let's go back. And I think we just 1 week, we both looked at each other and we're like, I think probably we should stick to this current schedule now, and let's stop in 10 days time, whatever. So it was about the journey. We knew when we'd come to the end of the road.
Yeah. Michael Andrews, how about you? And Spider-Verse, it was 2 years for you total on the film.
Yeah, and the blessing and the curse of animation is you're working on story in storyboard form from the get-go, so you're helping basically write the film, and you can throw massive sequences away and start completely over if you need to. So sometimes I'll at the end of a movie, I'll go back and I'll look at our first versions of sequences and just go, oh my God, what were we thinking? How did we even get from point A to point B? Because it's terrible. Like the first passes are usually really bad, and so you have to do a lot of work to find a way. And you always have that production deadline hovering, and you want to get it as good as you can by the time you get there. When I'm working on a scene, and like I work with various directors, but the ultimate say is Phil Lord. This is his baby, and he's very funny while I'm playing something back. He'll verbalize aloud like, "Great, there, yeah," and that's when I know, okay, at least we're getting somewhere. He's pleased, but ultimately, you do get a little numb to it, and you don't really know until you sit, and you really have to sit with the audience and watch it in a preview and see how they respond, because sometimes you're surprised at how something you thought was working isn't, and sometimes some things are working better than you thought. So you really need the feedback.
You need an UI sometimes. So. Hilda, how about you?
I think everyone said exactly how I feel about this issue. Trust your gut. I think you also have to really know what movie you're cutting. It's at least with American Fiction, that was kind of our hugest challenge was tone and rhythm, because this was a movie where we had great actors, we had an amazing script, a really good foundation. So those are all things you go into a movie thinking, okay, we have the best ingredients to begin with. But then finding the tone and rhythm of this one was intense and took a lot of work. We spent a long time going around and around. We ended up omitting like 11 scenes from the film, which for a movie of this scope was, kind of a fair bit. We very late in the game did a big Act 1 restructure. We really needed time to find it. And the only thing that could keep us going, the script is always the North Star, but is that inner voice and instinct that tells you, I know what kind of movie I'm cutting. And you have to trust that voice and keep searching out that film. And in this particular one, it was a very delicate balance of tone and rhythm. And we just had to work hard for it,
Yeah, it was multiple tones. That was the thing. So yeah. Michael Harte?
Yeah, I think actually it's very instinctual for me. I kind of I like to watch everything before I lay an edit on the material, which drives directors mad, because in documentaries there's a lot of material to get through, but I struggle to cut anything until I've seen everything, and I ask for the time to do that. But But what I end up doing is then I start, once I know all my material, I don't like to loosely assemble stuff. I'd like to dive in and not fine cut it, but get it pretty close to what I think it can be. Again, which can drive the director a little crazy because they want to ease into the edit. But then what I don't do, and I'm still on the fence whether it's a good idea or not, but I don't watch what I cut. So if I spend a day cutting, I'll definitely not watch it at the end of the day. And I try not, as Michael said, to become numb to my own edits and my own work. And I try not to get invested in the 4 days I've done creating this scene from archive material, whatever sources. I try to almost pretend that I didn't cut it, and I put that scene away and I'll move on to the next one. And they give me a structure to work with. And so a director goes a long time without seeing any of my work. But I work with a couple of good directors that I really now trust my process, I think. And then when we decide to watch some things, then I feel like I can really feel where it's working and where it's not, because I feel like I'm watching somebody else's material or somebody else's work, and it's a lot easier to pick that apart because it feels like I'm not as invested in it. And I just don't like to watch my work too much until near the end of the process, and then I really kind of we really spend a long time finessing and tweaking, and then, as William said, I think the key is then getting new eyes and getting an audience in to watch it. And it's amazing when you think you're in a good place and you start to show it with. I mean, the truth is, when I show it to my partner Claire, and it just is a different movie, and I can feel the bumps, I can feel where this is going wrong, and there's no more honest feedback than somebody picking up their phone and looking at it, and that's as good a note as you'll ever get about a scene.
It's
and
just
that
crushing,
happened,
right? Yeah.
His game was back to the drawing board, but that's the process.
Well, oftentimes you guys have to work with temp music. So how do you feel about editing with temp tracks? And do you often wish you had the real score to work with? Mike Andrews, I know you had some of Daniel Pemberton's score, right, for Spider-Verse?
Yeah, I mean, luckily being a sequel, there was some stuff to go off of, which was great. And he also, in the early days of the second one, he submitted a whole bin of stuff that he was just experimenting with, and we used that a lot for action sequences and certain things. And it's amazing how much of what he was experimenting with way back then ended up in the movie, and even something that he put in for the opening credits was something I remembered from being from that bin. So I usually, I love to. We have to do like full sound effects, full music. We have to pretend like we're watching storyboards, and so we need all the audio help we can get to make it feel like we're watching a movie. So we go all in on that, and I go to either like Daniel's general scores, like to try to keep it in his ballpark, but he's pretty diverse, so it depends on what movies he's done. But I also had the luxury of having Daniel down the hall from me here for about 3 weeks, and I was able to go back and forth with him, and it was fantastic because I've never had that opportunity to actually like go, oh, you know what, that thing you're working on right now, we just extended it 5 seconds, so sorry, and then he would shoot something back to me, and it was a great system. I wish it was going on for the whole movie though.
Yeah. Hilda, how about you?
American Fiction was an unusual film because Cord knew from the beginning he wanted to temp with jazz, which is a very tricky thing. I mean, not jazz scores necessarily, jazz. So it's very difficult to cut, of course. It's really syncopated, the rhythms, there are a zillion solos in jazz songs. It was that was a challenge, and one that we just kind of kept circling around and around as we were preparing for friends and family screenings, like, let's swap out this cue, let's figure out a different thing here. And then the movie, of course, needed movie music as well. It needed score, temped. So it was that was sort of a beast for a while, to be honest. I there were times when I was like, what I would give for a music editor, but luckily, I mean, I grew up in a household that my dad is a jazz head and has like 4,000 records in his house. So it was kind of a weirdly perfect fit that I was like, all right, I actually know how to do this. I can do it.
You're just familiar with jazz, so.
Yeah. No, I did. I called my dad on a few tracks where I was stuck. I called my dad and was like, Dad, help me out here.
Oh, so he's like a assistant, like music supervisor on the film too. So
yes. Yeah, my dad, an English professor, is an uncredited music professor. Yes.
Michael Harte, you had your Back to the Future scores and everything you could work off of for this.
Yeah, that was the easy one because it was pre-written, but I'm terrible because I use a lot of temp as I'm cutting, because like I said, I like to jump in and kind of not fine cut, but cut early doors, and I use temp all the time. And especially when you work in documentaries, there's the scheduling problem. You can't bring composers on early; it's too expensive. So you use temp for the longest time, and you kind of fall in love with it, which is half the job is not doing that and keeping the distance and thinking this is only for rhythm. I'm only using this for rhythm. I'm only using this to signify where we may or may not use music. But inevitably, sometimes the director and me falls in love with the music. And for Still, we had a really, really strong score temp on it that drove a lot of it. And I just worked on the Beckham series. It was the same where I used temp until we got the composer. But the difference on Still was we got John Powell, who's an amazing composer, to do it, and he hadn't done a documentary before. And so I said, look, I've got a score and here you go, and I got a temp score, so it'll be easy for you. And he was like, yeah, I'd love to see it take the temp off. I'm going to start from scratch, which I had never done. And so I struggled with it for the longest time. But I'm not going to argue with John Powell. He's incredible. And I listen to his music when I'm cycling to work. I was just like, this guy is a god. So, and he really pulled it off. He discovered something completely new that we could never have. And it worked. And it was, to be honest, it was a real lesson on this project as to my relationship with music in an edit. And that's down to John and how good he is.
Victoria, how about you?
I mean, I love playing with temp score. I always assemble with temp score and spend hours and hours trying 4 or 5 themes and then seeing which one's got legs for returning to using again. It ends up, my temp score ends up being quite, heterogeneous, not quite as homogenous as obviously the score will end up being. And yes, it's easy to kind of fall in love with it. The unusual thing with Saltburn, it's the first time I've come across a director who said, please screen the assembly with no music, which was bum clenching for me. I mean, it was a long assembly, and we have montages in there. We've got dance sequences. There was silence. And it was quite painful for me, but you know what? I would never tell Emerald she was right to her face, but she's not here. And there was some merit in it. So the reason she doesn't like to hear music is because she doesn't want to get wedded to that sequence dovetails into that sequence, into that one, because the music works. She wants to kind of coldly, coolly, analytically move blocks around. So I muted all my music, and we moved stuff around, and only on our second or third pass, about a week or two before showing producers, she said, okay, we better start choosing music now. And thankfully, we had really similar taste. So I unmuted quite a few. There were quite a few areas where I said, I'll just play you what I kind of cut to, what I assembled to. And then other stuff we sort of found together, but we were really in sync, thank God, with music. And I actually learned something through the process. I thought, you know what, there may be some kind of method in it. However painful screening an assembly to a director with no music.
It's a very clinical approach, just no music, but it also kind of amps up the cringe aspect of the movie. Obviously, it's not the final cut, but
so her argument is, I want to know if something works or not, in its own right. My counter argument would be, I like to see stuff in the best presentation possible. My assistant on Saltburn is fantastic, and we're doing wonderful temp sound effects and everything. And I want, if I can see something in its best light and it's not working, then there's no excuses. It's not working. It's too long. It's not working. It's in the wrong place. So you can argue it both ways, but it was a good learning curve for me.
Yeah, sure. Billy, Air is unique because it doesn't have a score, but it has amazing 80s needle drops, a lot of Tangerine Dream.
Yeah, the original script had several songs written into it. But then about a week or two before we started shooting, Ben said, I want to have a lot more songs in the movie than as written. And he gave me a 80s playlist that was probably 3 or 4 hours worth of songs, and I grew up in the 80s too. So I had my own ideas about songs, and there was a real sort of trial and error process with all those songs. And always with 10 music, I tend to cut the scenes with no music. I don't want to be influenced by the rhythm of the music. I want the scenes that, have their own rhythm, to find their own rhythm, and then find music that works with that. Because I feel like it's easy to throw a piece of music on something and it fools you sometimes into thinking the scene's the right length, or music can give you the mistaken feeling that something's working better than it is. So I really try and work the scene as much as I can before I start, and get it to a point where I feel like I can play with or without music. And then, if it needs music to support it, and I'll put it in, but try not to do it where it's the music is making it work or not making it work, but with Air, like I said, there were so many songs we just kept, the more we put in, the better it worked. And, the ins and outs were masterfully mixed by Andy Nelson, who's, just an amazing re-recording mixer. And then when we were doing the actual score, we had a couple of composers in mind, and they were all busy, the ones we wanted to use. And meanwhile, we were shooting, and I started putting in, temp music from 80s movies, and a couple 90s movies, but mostly 80s movies. And Ben liked it so much, and it seemed to fit the movie so well, that we just, at some point he said to me, why don't we just buy all the temp music? And I had bought a couple of films I had done. We bought 1 or 2 cues with a composer. We just never felt like the composer, nailed it. But to do a whole film that way, I was like, sounds great, let's do it. So then I continued on putting in, temp music from other scores, and like I said, a lot of Tangerine Dream. And so it would all, I wanted to obviously feel like as of a piece, so that, I wanted, couldn't be all these different sort of tones and kind of styles of music. So it ended up working great. And unfortunately, when we got to the end and we had to get the rights to all the music, that became its own nightmare, because you'd be surprised how many people don't know who owns music. The songs were a little easier, although we had to push and pull with the prices of the songs. But the 10 music, we had a lot of trouble sometimes finding. I think there were 25 people who had passed away that had written or either owned the music or wrote the music. And it was, so a few times we had to change cues out because we couldn't never find who owned the rights. I mean, you'd think that like Universal Studios or whoever would know who owned the rights to their music from movies of the 80s, but oftentimes they didn't. And we even got to the point where we were going on social media looking and are you the same so-and-so who wrote a score for, and sometimes we got lucky and sometimes we didn't. So it was a constant swapping out of things, trying to find, oh my God, this piece works so beautifully and we can't get the rights. And it was driving me crazy, and we'd have to find another piece. And it was quite a Herculean effort by our music supervisor to get it all cleared in time. And then we got towards the end, and I said to Ben, we have no music for the end credits, because we don't have it, and we don't have any money to buy any more songs or any more score. It's too expensive. So we did find one of the remaining members of Tangerine Dream. We got in contact with him, and the end credit music he wrote is the only original piece of music in the movie.
Wow. So you have a little bit of everything. You have the purchase temp tracks, needle drops, and then original score for the credits.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, the first piece he wrote was for the end credits we loved, but then we gave the movie over to Amazon, and they said, this sounds a lot like U2, The Streets Have No Name, like to a point where I don't think we can have it. So we had to go back a couple of versions, because we had put him through, we had him write several versions. We had to go back a couple of versions because they thought we were going to get sued. So, and it turned out that the piece we used was better for the film anyway. So, it worked out in the best way possible. But it was, usually with tent music, I'm so sick of it by the time, because I've picked it all and I've worked with it, and as you're recutting, you have to keep it in sync, and it's just a whole nother job, and I love doing it, but then I'm so happy when the composer starts, because we're going to get real music. And my only fault of that was, like, I tend to like things more than I probably should from the composer, because I see an opportunity to get the tent music out, and get the real score in, so I have to be very careful when I hear a real score to be very, very, discerning about it, because my tendency is like, it's great, put it in, because it's not my tent music anymore, because I've lived with it for so long and I'm so anxious to have the real score, that I have to be careful about liking things just because they're new,
Yeah, definitely. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap, but it was so great speaking with all of you guys, and congratulations on all of your films. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Take care.
Good to see you all.
Yeah, bye.